The Texas sun bore down like a punishing hand, scorching the land until even the wind carried the scent of dust. Clara Monroe paused at the well in front of her ranch house, one hand steadying the rope as the bucket scraped against the stone. Every drop of water felt like borrowed treasure these days, and she guarded it as fiercely as she guarded her cattle. Her father had once said water was worth more than gold in a drought, and now she knew the truth of his words. The bucket sloshed as it surfaced, cool against her calloused palms. She lifted it with care, aware of how many days' survival depended on this simple act. Her lips were parched, but she resisted drinking until the livestock had their share. Duty came before comfort. That had always been her way. But as she turned toward the trough, a shadow stretched across the ground, falling long and heavy over the dust. Clara's shoulders stiffened. Strangers rarely came this far out of town, and when they did, it rarely meant good news. "Ma'am," a voice rasped. She looked up, and her grip on the bucket tightened. A man stood there, tall and broad, his hat casting his face in shadow. His shirt clung with sweat, dust streaking his arms and trousers. He carried himself with the weary poise of someone who had spent too many miles in the saddle, and yet his eyes, dark, watchful, carrying storms within, rested on her with intent. "Water," he said simply, his voice rough as gravel. Clara measured him with a glance, the way her father had taught her, boots scuffed near to ruin, holster hanging heavy with a revolver that had seen use. A man on the edge, but not yet broken. Her heart beat faster, though whether from fear or pity, she could not say. "This is private land," she answered, setting the bucket against the trough. "Water here isn't for the taking." The stranger stepped closer, careful but unyielding. "I don't aim to steal it, miss. Just a skin. A swallow or two." She searched his face for deceit. Men in town had warned her about drifters, hard cases with hunger in their bellies and mischief in their bones. Some came looking for work, others for trouble, and a woman alone on a ranch was an easy target. Yet his tone held no threat, only weariness. She noticed then the dust-crusted bandage wrapped around his forearm, and the faint tremor in his hands as though fatigue rattled through his bones. Clara exhaled slowly, fighting her better judgment. Compassion had cost her family dearly before, but to deny water under the merciless sky felt like condemning a man outright. She dipped the tin ladle into the bucket and held it out. "1 cup. That's all." The man accepted it with a nod, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest instant. His hand was rough, hardened by years of labor, yet the touch was careful, as though he feared breaking something fragile. He drank deeply, every swallow echoing with gratitude, then lowered the cup and set it gently back in her hand. "Much obliged." His voice was quieter now. The edge of desperation softened. Clara studied him again, up close. The lines on his face told of hardship, sunburnt skin, hollow cheeks, and eyes too sharp to belong to a man at peace. She wanted to ask his name, yet something in his guarded stance warned her not to pry. "You've had your drink," she said, stepping back toward the house. "Best move along before the sun sets." But the man didn't turn to leave. Instead, he looked past her, toward the ranch house, the barn, the fields cracked with drought. His gaze lingered on the corral, where a few cattle huddled miserably against the heat. There was no greed in his eyes, only recognition. A man who had seen hunger in animals before. "You run this place alone?" he asked. Clara stiffened. "That's none of your concern." He inclined his head slightly, as if conceding the point. "Fair enough. But it's hard land for one person. Harder still when the sky won't give rain." The word struck deeper than she wished to admit. Loneliness weighed on her shoulders as surely as the drought, but she had long since learned to mask it. She tightened her grip on the ladle and forced her voice steady. "I'll manage. I always have." The stranger seemed about to reply, but then he pressed his lips together, choosing silence instead. He tipped his hat, a gesture oddly courteous for a man so worn. "Thank you for the drink. May God repay you." He turned and walked down the trail, dust rising with each step. Clara watched him until he disappeared beyond the ridge, swallowed by the glare of sun and horizon. A part of her was relieved, but another part felt unsettled, as though his departure carried the weight of unfinished business. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The dogs barked intermittently, pacing along the fence line. She rose twice to check the shutters, once to bank the fire. Every sound of the wind stirred unease in her chest. She told herself it was foolishness. The stranger was gone, and she had nothing to fear. Yet her mind kept replaying the hunger in his eyes, not just for water, but for something deeper, belonging, perhaps, or shelter. By dawn, the unease sharpened into alarm. She stepped onto the porch, rifle balanced in her arms, and froze. Across the dry pasture, silhouettes dotted the ridgeline. Horses shifted restlessly. Men, half a dozen at least, sat mounted and silent, watching her ranch with the patience of hunters. And at their head, unmistakable even at distance, was the stranger she had given water. Clara's pulse pounded. Yesterday, he had come as a weary man asking for mercy. Today, he had returned with a company of men, their presence wrapping around her land like a tightening noose. Her father's words whispered through her memory. Compassion's a gamble, girl. Sometimes it wins you a friend. Sometimes it opens you a gate to wolves. The sun climbed higher, glaring off the barrels of rifles slung at saddles. The men did not advance, but neither did they retreat. Clara tightened her grip on the rifle, breath catching in her throat. She could not yet tell if this was salvation knocking, or danger come to claim its due. Clara Monroe stood rigid on her porch, rifle pressed to her shoulder, eyes narrowing against the glare of morning sun. Across the ridge, the riders remained motionless, their horses pawing at the dirt, tails flicking at flies. 6 men, maybe 7, hard silhouettes against the horizon, and at their center, the stranger she had given water to only yesterday. Her throat felt dry as ash. "So that's what kindness buys me," she whispered under her breath. The dogs barked again, pacing along the porch rails, hackles raised. Clara's finger hovered near the trigger, though she knew a single bullet would do little against a mounted company. She steadied herself, remembering her father's lessons. Don't waste fear on what you can't yet read. Measure first. Decide second. The stranger lifted his hand, and the men behind him halted. Dust swirled around their horses' legs, but no one advanced. He dismounted with the quiet grace of a man accustomed to command. His boots crunched over gravel as he descended the slope, leaving his men watching from the ridge, like vultures waiting for a signal. Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. Every instinct screamed at her to fire a warning shot, yet something in his deliberate, unhurried stride stopped her. He wasn't storming her land. He was approaching as though walking into a parlor. "Morning, Miss Monroe," he called, voice carrying steady across the distance. Her breath caught. He knew her name. "Stop there," she snapped, cocking the rifle. "Another step, and you'll regret it." He paused, hands lifted in calm surrender. Up close, he seemed different from yesterday. Not just weary, but commanding. Dust clung to his coat, yet his posture held the sharp edge of discipline. The kind of man who led others, outlaws, or worse. "I don't mean harm," he said evenly. "Name's Ethan Cross. These men ride with me. We're not here to raid you." Clara narrowed her gaze, distrust hardening in her chest. "You show up at my well half dead, then return with an army. Forgive me if I don't take your word." Ethan's jaw tightened. He let the accusation hang between them, then nodded slightly. "Fair. But the truth is, we've been driving cattle north. Hard land, no water for miles. Your well may be the only fresh supply we've seen in days. My men," he glanced back at the riders, "they're worn near to breaking." Clara hesitated. His words struck familiar. She knew the toll of heat on livestock, the desperation of keeping men alive on open land. And yet, mercy yesterday had brought danger today. "You've no right to stake claim on what isn't yours," she said, voice firm. "This land is mine, every fence post and stone. You and your men will move along." Ethan's eyes locked on hers. For a moment, silence reigned. Then he stepped closer, slow enough not to spook her trigger finger. "Miss Monroe, if I'd meant to take your well by force, we'd not be standing here trading words. But I won't lie, my men are thirsty, and I've got their lives to weigh against your suspicion." Her pulse raced. Was this negotiation, or veiled threat? She searched his face, trying to peel back the layers of grit and shadow. There was hardness there, yes, but also restraint. A man walking the line between law and desperation. "You talk like a man used to command," she said, testing him. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Once wore a badge long ago. Doesn't matter now." The admission struck her like a jolt. A lawman turned drifter? She didn't know whether it made him safer, or far more dangerous. Before she could reply, movement rippled among the men on the ridge. One of them rode forward, young and hot-blooded, rifle gleaming in the sun. "Boss, why waste time jawing? We need that water. She can't stop us all." Clara's heart hammered. Her finger inched closer to the trigger, but Ethan spun, his voice cracking like a whip. "Back in line, Mason." The rider reined his horse, glaring but obeying. Ethan's authority was ironclad, sharper than the rifle barrel aimed at him. Clara saw it then. This man commanded loyalty born not just of fear, but of respect. He turned back to her, lowering his voice. "I don't want bloodshed, Miss Monroe. Let me draw water for my men. Just enough to keep them riding. After that, we'll be gone." Clara wrestled with the decision, every muscle taut. She remembered her father's words about wolves at the gate. Yet something in Ethan's steady gaze tugged against her mistrust. Yesterday he had asked for 1 cup. Today he asked for a measure of faith. At last, she lowered the rifle, slightly, not fully. 1 barrel's worth. No more. And I'll be watching every drop. Ethan inclined his head, relief flickering across his features. "Fair bargain." He whistled sharply, and his men stirred but did not descend. Only 2 came forward with empty barrels, leading their horses. Clara kept her rifle ready as they filled them, her eyes never leaving Ethan's figure. He stood aside, watchful but unthreatening, as though silently vouching for their restraint. The process was tense, each slosh of water echoing louder than gunfire in the silence. When the barrels were full, the men hauled them back toward the ridge. None spoke a word against her terms. When it was done, Ethan remained. He approached the porch until only 10 paces separated them. Clara felt the weight of his presence, like a shadow stretching over her land. "You've shown us mercy twice now," he said, voice low. "That won't be forgotten." She lifted her chin. "Mercy isn't weakness, Mr. Cross. But test me again, and you'll find I shoot straight." A flicker of respect lit his eyes, as though he admired her defiance. He tipped his hat once more, then mounted his horse in one fluid motion. His men gathered behind him, and together they rode back toward the ridge. Clara stood frozen, rifle clenched, until the dust of their departure blurred them into the horizon. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. But as the silence returned, so did unease. Ethan Cross was not just a stranger now. He was a shadow over her land. His words echoed in her ears, a promise or a warning. She could not yet decide. That won't be forgotten. And Clara knew, with a chill that reached her bones, that their paths were far from finished crossing. The sun climbed slowly over the western plains, gilding the Monroe Ranch in a faint shimmer of gold. Clara Monroe stood at the edge of her corral, one hand resting against the worn wood of the fence, the other tightening around her shawl, as though it could shield her from more than the morning chill. She had not slept well since the night Ethan Cross and his men had surrounded her land. Their horses' shadows still lingered in her mind, like wolves circling a lamb. Yet today, there was no sound of hooves pounding the earth, only the uneasy silence of a prairie holding its breath. She had thought kindness was harmless when she had handed that cowboy a dipper of water, but now she saw how a single choice, born of mercy, had tangled her life with a man who carried both desperation and danger on his shoulders. By mid-morning, the sound she dreaded arrived. Hooves again. Clara stiffened, fingers brushing the rifle leaning against her porch. Dust swirled at the far end of the trail until a lone rider emerged, Ethan Cross, without the intimidating line of men behind him. He rode slow, his hat tilted low, his posture neither threatening nor submissive. He dismounted before reaching the gate, as though careful not to press too close. "I reckon you're not happy to see me," he said, voice low, carrying the rasp of a man unaccustomed to apologies. Clara lifted her chin. "You reckon right. For a moment, silence stretched between them, only the creak of his saddle as he tied his horse to the fence. His eyes, clear steel gray, met hers, holding neither arrogance nor pleading, only a blunt weariness. "I came to talk," he said simply. She narrowed her gaze. "Talk usually comes before threats, not after." Ethan flinched, just slightly, at her words. "I don't blame you for thinking the worst. My men—" He stopped, exhaled slowly. "They're hungry, restless, and near breaking. I don't control them as tight as I should. But I didn't ride here to take. Not today." Clara studied him, searching for deceit. But his stance was unarmed, his hat in his hands, his boots planted in the dust, like a man more burdened than bold. Against her better judgment, she lowered the rifle barrel. "What is it you want?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then said, "A chance. Not for me, for them. They'll do foolish things if I don't give them hope. I figure you know something about carrying weight alone." The words hit her sharper than she expected. For a heartbeat, Clara thought of her late father, of nights spent mending fences under lantern light, of wolves scratching at the chicken coop, while she fought them off, with nothing but grit and prayer. She didn't know the weight of solitude, though she'd never admit it aloud. But aligning herself with a man whose very presence endangered her ranch, that was another burden altogether. Still, curiosity pulled at her, almost against her will. "And why come to me?" "Because you didn't turn away when I asked for water," Ethan replied. His voice softened, almost uncertain. "Most folks do worse than turn away from men like me. You looked me in the eye." Clara said nothing, though her pulse quickened. It was not flattery, just observation, yet it felt heavier than praise. For several minutes, neither spoke. The wind tugged at her shawl, carrying the faint scent of sage. At last, Clara broke the silence. "Suppose I hear you out. What then? You want me to feed your men? Shelter them? Give them my land?" Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, I won't ask for more than you can give. All I want is a truce, a fragile one maybe. My men won't touch your well again, not unless you say so. In return," his jaw tightened, "in return, I ask you not to set the law on us. Not yet." The request was bold, and Clara felt the weight of it press into her chest. To stay silent meant risking her reputation, maybe even her safety. But turning him in, would that really be justice? Men driven by hunger were not so different from wolves. They lashed out when cornered. "Why should I trust your word?" she asked finally. Ethan's gaze darkened. "Because I've got nothing else to give you. A liar would bring gifts and promises. I can only bring truth, ugly as it is." The stark honesty in his tone unsettled her. She wanted to hate him, to see him as nothing more than a threat. Yet standing there, hat in his hands, he seemed less a villain and more a man caught in the teeth of circumstance. Clara folded her arms, her mind a battlefield between fear and reluctant empathy. "One wrong step," she warned, "and I won't hesitate to protect what's mine." Ethan inclined his head. Fair enough. The truce, if it could be called that, settled between them like an invisible thread, fragile, uncertain, but binding nonetheless. That night, Clara lit a lantern in her window, not as a beacon but as a warning. Still, as she sat by the fire, she found her thoughts circling back to the weary lines etched into Ethan's face, the way his voice carried both strength and surrender. She told herself she had made the choice out of necessity, that sparing conflict was better than inciting it. But deep inside, she wondered if some part of her had agreed, because she recognized the loneliness in him, a reflection of her own. The prairie winds whispered outside, rattling the shutters like restless spirits. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, whispering a silent prayer that her fragile alliance would not prove to be her undoing. Yet as the night deepened, she could not deny the faintest flicker of something else in her chest, hope, or perhaps the dangerous beginning of trust. The dawn broke sharp and cold over the Monroe Ranch, streaking the horizon in shades of rose and fire. Clara Monroe woke to the sound of distant thunder, or what she thought was thunder until she listened closer. Hooves. Too many to belong to Ethan alone. Her breath caught as she stepped onto the porch, shawl clutched around her shoulders. Across the plain, a dust cloud rose, carrying with it the restless stampede of men on horseback. Not Ethan's men this time, but riders wearing the tin stars of lawmen and the grim faces of neighbors who had long waited for a reason to come after the Cross gang. Clara's stomach twisted. Ethan had kept his word. His men had stayed away from her well, from her fences, from her livestock. But the truce had been fragile from the start, and fragile things rarely survived the weight of suspicion. The riders reined in at her fence, and Sheriff Hale, broad-shouldered and stern, tipped his hat. "Mornin', Miss Monroe. We're looking for Ethan Cross. Reckon you might know where he's hiding." Clara's heart lurched. She schooled her face into calm. "Why ride to me?" "Because he was seen near your land," Hale said flatly. "And folks talk. They say you struck some sort of bargain." The words landed heavy. Behind the sheriff, the townsman muttered, suspicion curling like smoke. Clara felt the weight of their judgment pressing on her, branding her guilty by association. She forced herself to meet Hale's eyes. "Ethan Cross came once. Alone. He left peaceably. That's all." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Hale studied her for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "If he shows here, you best think on where your loyalty lies, your neighbors or a drifter with outlaw blood." He tugged his reins, and the riders thundered on, leaving Clara with her pulse racing and her conscience aching. By the time the dust settled, Ethan himself appeared at the tree line, his horse lathered from a hard ride. He dismounted and strode toward her, tension in every line of his frame. "You saw him?" he asked. Clara nodded. "The sheriff's hunting you. He believes you've been here." "I have," Ethan admitted, voice low but steady. "But not to hide. To warn you. My men, they're restless. Some don't care for truces. They're fixing to raid the town before the law hunts them down. I came to say, keep clear. This fight ain't yours." Clara stared at him, her chest tight. "And what of you? You'll fight alongside them." Ethan's jaw hardened. "They're my men. I can't just walk away." "But you gave me your word," Clara pressed, her voice trembling. "You said your men wouldn't touch my land. You said this truce mattered." His gray eyes flickered, torn between duty and something deeper. "It does matter. More than I ever expected." The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken fears. Clara realized then that her conflict was no longer just about safety. It was about trust. She had let him close, if only a little, and now her loyalty was tested as much as his. "Ethan," she whispered, "if you stand with them, you'll be hunted down and killed. And if you fall, all that weight you've carried will fall on me too. You gave me truth once. Give it to me again. What do you want?" Ethan's chest rose and fell, his hand tightening around the brim of his hat. Finally, he said, almost brokenly, "I want to believe there's more than hunger and running. I want to believe a man can choose better. But if I turn from them, I lose the only family I've had." Clara stepped closer, her voice steady though her heart hammered. "Then maybe it's time to build a new one." For the first time since she had met him, Ethan's mask cracked. The weight of years of hardship, of battles fought in dust and blood, showed plain on his face. And beneath it all, Clara saw not an outlaw, but a man desperate for belonging. Before either could say more, gunfire echoed across the plain. Clara flinched. Ethan cursed and ran to the fence, eyes scanning the horizon. Smoke rose from the direction of town. "It started," he muttered. Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't go. If you ride into that, you'll die." His gaze burned into hers, conflict raging in his eyes. "If I stay, I betray them. If I go, I betray you." "Then choose the life that gives you something worth living for," Clara urged, her voice breaking. The moment held, fragile as glass. Then Ethan exhaled, the fight leaving his shoulders. "Maybe you're right." Together, they stood as the chaos raged in the distance. Hours later, when the law returned, dragging a few of Ethan's men in chains and laying others across wagons, Ethan remained at Clara's side. He had not fought. He had not run. He had chosen. Sheriff Hale dismounted, his gaze hard as stone as it swept over Ethan. "You'll answer for your part in this, Cross. The judge will decide what kind of man you are." Ethan lifted his chin. "Fair enough." Clara stepped forward, surprising even herself. He kept his word to me. He could have ridden into that fight, but he didn't. That ought to count for something. Hale's eyes narrowed, but after a long pause, he tipped his hat. We'll see what the court says. But your voice carries weight, Miss Monroe. As the riders left with the remnants of the gang, Clara and Ethan remained on the porch, the air thick with exhaustion and something unspoken. You risked yourself speaking for me, Ethan said quietly. Clara met his gaze. You risked yourself by choosing me over them. Seems we're even. For the first time, a faint, tired smile curved his lips. Not triumph, not relief, just the fragile beginning of hope. The prairie stretched wide before them, uncertain as the future. Their alliance had been tested in the fire of loyalty and judgment, and though scars remained, something new had been forged. The possibility of love, not born from pity, but from choice. Clara lifted her chin against the winds, her voice steady. If you mean to stay, Ethan, then stay as a man willing to build, not burn. He nodded, eyes never leaving hers. Then I'll stay. If you'll have me. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in gold. In that quiet moment, two souls, once bound by thirst and necessity, found themselves bound instead by something far stronger, trust earned, and a fragile love tempered in the fire of loyalty tested.